And hello there again, YouTubers. This is Sadie Mangaka giving you my second day of coverage for the 2015 League of Legends World Championship. We're going to be looking at day 2 of the group stages. We had a lot of exciting games. We got to see some games from Group D, the infamous group of death, with some expected results and some really surprising results, as well as plenty of upsets today and a couple of wins for red side, as well as some insights following up on a couple things that I noted from the LPO regionals. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started with our coverage. I just need to change this and pull up our first game. And now actually I decided to change what format, or rather what image I was going to use for this series, namely just because I wanted to show more of the game. I think it's important to show like the order picks event so you can break it down for draft analysis, but since we're talking more about the games here, I think it's a good thing to do to show the scoreboard so then you guys can get a sense of the game, and then you can kind of correlate the numbers on screen with like the narrative of the games themselves. So without further ado, the first game of today was KT Rolster versus Team Solo Mid. Now a lot of people didn't expect Team Solo Mid to do so well. I just gotta get around, and there we go, all pretty on the screen for us. This is taken, by the way, from lolesportspedia.com. It's a great resource for research, for catching up on the VODs, for seeing how well the teams are doing at these tournaments, or to look back on a player's career. Any old tournaments that you want to see, it's just a fantastic resource. So if you want to go back and watch some older games, or if you're a content creator in form of video or in the form of writing, you want some statistics, or you want to look at some games, this is a great place to do it, my friends. Compiles VODs, it compiles match history data where it's available, so you can look at some of the numbers in the game. This combined with OracleElixirs.com is just a fantastic resource for any sort of analyst to work with. So coming into the KT Rolster and Team Solo Mid game, this is one of the matches where we expected it to largely be a stomp in favor of KT Rolster. TSM's been having a very difficult season this summer split. Ever since MSI, they just look disjointed, not really having this strong identity that's working for them. And these issues really continue to show today in this game. Particularly in their composition, they try and have too many threats at the same time. They get Bjergsen onto his LeBlanc into the Azir matchup against Nagne, and this actually works out really well for TSM. We saw this tactic used yesterday in the H2K versus SK Telecom game, where Ryu was able to kind of keep Faker down, cause him to fall behind in CS with the aggression coming from LeBlanc, and Bjergsen, being in a situation where he's a better mid laner than Nagne, was able to actually draw a lot of pressure in that mid lane and even score a kill for himself in the 1v1. Bjergsen had a very good game in this series, save for a couple of mistakes that go along with Team Solo Mid. Now on the issue of Team Solo Mid's composition having too many threats, you have champions like Olaf in the top lane and Vayne in the ADC position, where these champions need to have farm, and there's only so much farm to go around, especially when you're playing out these lane swap scenarios, which is what occurs within this game. And so because of that, Olaf isn't going to get enough items to get tanky enough, Vayne isn't going to get enough items to do enough damage, and then furthermore, there's just the issue of you've placed Turtle, who is not a mechanically gifted AD carry anymore. He's really slacking in terms of NA, and so on the global stage, it's even worse for him. And so putting him on a champion like Vayne, where the pressure is on him to carry when he's not performing at the level where he can, is just the wrong idea to do. I would have much rather seen a Sivir here, because it would enable the LeBlanc and enable the Olaf to get on the targets, as well as provide TSM with much needed wave clear. They decided to pick the Vayne, and it didn't work out for them. So KT Rolster, on the other hand, they get Darius for Someday, and everyone's expecting Someday to roll over Dyrus in the top lane. Dyrus is infamous for having bad games, or for being ganked repeatedly and farmed for kills, given over the enemy top laner. And at this tournament, where the top lane carry meta is going to be such a huge thing, that's a targeted weak point which we see occur here. Now this namely is just because of Dyrus' own fault and greed. To explain the start of the game, we see a lane swap coming out from KT Rolster's side, or was it from Team Solo Mid? Who set it all up? I'm trying to recall exactly. Yeah, so TSM, I believe TSM went top side with their lane swap, and then KT Rolster went bottom side with their lane swap. So TSM initiates the lane swap. In this case, they'd want to avoid the Kog'Maw Vayne matchup in the bottom lane. And they go for these objectives and they go for the fast push, and then KT tries their best to respond with these fast pushes as well. And this is where it kind of begins to, we're seeing these Korean teams be uncomfortable in these fast lane swap scenarios where rather than freezing the lane for the AD carry, I'll stop touching my hair now, instead of seeing the lanes being frozen for the AD carry to solo farm, you know, teams are just pushing in the towers, and the Korean teams go, oh, we need to respond as well with that. And then it looks uncoordinated, it looks awkward, and they fall behind in it. And TSM actually plays the lane swap really well. That's one thing that TSM has been good at is the lane swap. Unfortunately, though, Dyrus decides to overextend and trying to get some farm, and KT Rolster just immediately sets on the dive for him, and it's completely avoidable. TSM sees... they see Peekaboo, they see Someday, they see Score all on the bottom side, and Dyrus approaches the minion wave, and he gets killed for it, and it gives up first blood within the first 6 minutes, and the kills go over to Someday. He does this mistake a couple of other times across the map, and KT is able to once again set Someday up to get these kills, which is incredibly beneficial for them, not only because Someday is one of their star carry players, but because while both he and Dyrus are suffering from this lane swap and being denied heavily in terms of farm, Someday is actually able to get kills out of it. Someday isn't overextending like Dyrus. He's backing away when he realizes that, hey, the enemy team could be on my side of the map. I just need to, back away from the farm. I'll just go take some jungle creeps. And then he does that, so he avoids giving out the deaths that Dyrus does, but then he also gets kills on top of it, and this lets Someday begin to develop the items that he needs to in order to go on and have an overall good performance. Now, in the early game, despite Dyrus' missteps, Team Solo Mid does hang in there for a little bit. They're building a huge CS advantage for Bjergsen in the mid lane. Again, he's just basically face-rolling Nagne. Nagne not having the best game on his ear, not exactly being a star mid lane player. And so there's actually some hope for TSM in here, and while KT Rolster is focusing on the top lane, at this point the players have switched sides, and Someday and Dyrus are playing on the top side. As they focus on that top side to get Someday some kills, TSM is able to respond with a couple of dragons. So everything's looking really well for them. But what really shows in this game, in terms of the macro play level difference between a North American team and a Korean team, is the punish game for it. KT's feeling uncomfortable in an early game scenario that they don't play out too often. This causes them to go away from their identity where Peekaboo roams, gets these early kills. Instead, he just stays in lane because KT doesn't know how to respond to the situation, and they're not playing to their strengths. But once Team Solo Mid make a couple of key mispositions, go for a couple of bad fights, KT immediately punishes it. There's a fight in the mid lane. It goes KT's way very handily just because their team fighting is way better than TSM's, and they take the two towers in the mid lane, both outer and inner, within one single push. And then later on, again, they're giving another thing where Team Solo Mid is pushing down the mid lane. They come to the inner tower of KT Rolster, and then they back off. But for some reason, Lustboy backs out through the Wraith Brush on the blue side of the map where KT is playing. And then he gets caught out by Score ulting behind him, and that gives up a kill, and that leads to some more ejectors of KT Rolster. And this is where like Korean macro play really shows, is that when you make a mistake, they're going to snowball it into an objective. This is both true for not only Korean teams, but upper level teams as well. Some of the Chinese teams at Worlds this year are also capable of doing this and very consistent with it. And then we also see superior rotations coming out from KT. They go for this play on Dyrus in the bot lane, and TSM, doing the smart thing, tries to answer by seeing numerous members of KT on the bottom side of the map. They go for a Baron, but Scores on Rek'Sai. He's able to ult on over. The rest of KT is able to catch up, and they just clean sweep TSM there and maybe lose 1 or 2 kills. Peekaboo has a really good engage where he distracts TSM. He goes in with the Alistar, uses the ultimate to absorb all their cooldowns. Bjergsen basically blows his entire combo onto Peekaboo, and then he presents no threat to Nagne. So Nagne is able to approach the team fight, get the soldiers in there, get the Emperor's Divide in there, and from there it's a clean up for KT Rolster. So TSM losing like we expected to. They had a really good early game, but a questionable draft composition from them, as well as key macro mistakes in terms of player positioning, lead KT Rolster to take this game after a shaky start. We can now It is something to say that KT is a little consistent. They've dropped teams in the lower level teams in the LCK, so it is possible that they could be upset in a group stage environment, and so we saw potentials of that in the early game. But again, Team Solo Mid needs to tighten up their game. Dyrus needs to be able to allow himself to give up the CS and not approach those things so that he stops giving these kills over to KT Rolster. and to other teams as well. Otherwise, he's going to continue to be a weak point for TSM in this very top lane heavy meta tournament. So that's KT Rolster versus TSM. Let's move on to the next game. It's just going to take me a moment to switch it on over. I have to look around my microphone. It's like right here, and you guys can't see it. So I have to do this. So the second game of the day, it's a very exciting one because it's a little back and forth, and there's a very exciting finish to it, and there's also just some really great playmaking on both sides. So, and that game would be, let me find it. I have to look for the right kind of graph, excuse me. LGD versus Origin. So let's pull this up. So LGD Gaming versus Origin. Now this is the #1 seeded team from China versus the European team which qualified through the regionals. So this is Soaz and Xpeke once again on the world stage. And now Xpeke was targeted by the analyst desk at this tournament for being a bit of a weak link this season for Origin. His champion pool has been the widest or strongest, but Xpeke really shows up in this tournament in the later stages of the game, or in this match rather. So looking at this team composition, LGD begin to draft for a Juggernaut composition, and then they veer away from an emphasis on kiting to an emphasis on engaging. In this game, TBQ's Lee Sin and Rek'Sai are banned away from him, and then Amazing is able to pick up Elise for himself because LGD prioritized the Lulu pick in this scenario. So as they build this Juggernaut composition, they decide to veer away from it. TBQ picks up Vi for himself, and then it's coupled with Acorn's Malphite. The idea here being that Origin has secured Kalista, so the best way to lock her down is to use Vi's Assault and Battery to lock her down. It's a targeted spell. Kalista cannot evade it. Then while she's paralyzed by that, Malphite can follow up with the Unstoppable Force, and from there, you have Kog'Maw just firing away on artillery from it. Origin, to respond to the Malphite pick, decides to use the Vladimir on Soaz so that Malphite doesn't build the armor, so he doesn't get the extra damage that he just freely gets when he builds armor due to his kit, and has to itemize magic resist, and this fairly works for the first part of the game. So we go on into this series of games. We see Xpeke taking Teleport on the Orianna, which he tries to use throughout the map to answer some plays. They don't really work out so well. It's kind of an overall just it's not really a positive or a negative from him, but it does give him some flexibility, lets him keep up and farm with Godvy's Lulu. So, excuse me. Once again, we see here in this lane swap, we see Imp in the top side of the map, and he continues to push the minion waves into the tower and take it down. And then Acorn is able to, very much like Someday, avoid being ganked in the bottom lane. He sees that, he realizes, hey, a whole bunch of my team just showed top side, so now the enemy team knows that, hey, there's no one down here to support me, so I shouldn't be in this lane because they're coming for a gank, and he recalls just in time to avoid Amazing coming into his lane and getting a kill onto him. So very good awareness from that, but LGD looked way more comfortable in this fast push tower lane swap, and interestingly enough, Origin actually go for a Korean style lane swap where they leave Niels alone in the bottom lane to farm the minion wave. Now this ultimately does lead to LGD's favor because Imp kind of slow pushes the waves into the tower in the sense that he always bounces it back. He just repeatedly pushes the wave in the tower, lets it bounce back, and does this several times. No other laners or champions or teammates come into his lane to help him take the tower down. And so he gets the same level of farm as Niels, but he also gets the tower gold from it, which lets him get farther ahead when he swaps down to meet Niels in the bottom lane. I believe Niels actually goes to the top side at this point, but you get the idea. I think LGD played the lane swap early very well and showed that a Chinese team is able to handle these fast push lane swaps scenarios particularly well. So going on through this, we see LGD trying to go for these invades on the blue side with their composition. Acorn randomly teleports in. There's a bit of a disconnect between TBQ and Acorn, though. Acorn tries to force a play, and Niels and Mithy are able to kite it on out, and then they turn the fight around. Acorn has a lot of missed unstoppable forces this game. Not really missed. Dodge is more like the accurate term. He keeps going for these targets that still have their summoner spells up. He goes through these flash unstoppable force plays, but they respond to immediately with flashes from the enemy side, and then this will turn around to bite LGD later on in the game. So LGD actually lose out on this particular trade in the blue buff. This gets Origin a couple of kills, kind of resets the map. But then it gets reset with Imp split pushing on the Kog'Maw. Now, if you want to see a fantastic example of Kog'Maw mechanics, just watch this game. The moment that Xpeke places the ball next to Imp, he immediately flashes the moment that Shockwave is being casted, and he dodges it perfectly. There's a very cool 2v1 and another consecutive 2v1 between PYL, Imp, and then Soaz and Expeke. Soaz is pushing the bottom lane, Imp is recalling right in front of him, then he turns on him, his PYL comes down, they're able to kill him, Expeke tries to teleport into the bottom lane, he goes for the shockwave, Imp perfectly avoids the spell with his flash, re-engages on Expeke, and scores a double kill for himself. Imp at the early stages of this game was massive and monstrous, but this is going to run out for him eventually going on to the game. So, given all these factors, LGD is collecting some of the towers. They're getting a couple of the dragons. Origin, however, is picking up dragons just because of the way that the rotations are playing out in this game. They're able to go for these objectives that get the Callista on them. There's no chance for TBTQ to steal them. The Origin actually gets the first dragon of the game. Malphite's building the MR, as I mentioned before, and he's not able to really contain Soaz's split push. Soaz actually is able to create a split push that goes all the way down to the inhibitor tower on the top side of the map for LGD, so he's creating a lot of pressure for himself in that case. And again, there's like brilliant just outplays from Imp throughout the middle of this game, but then comes a crucial team fight around the 30-minute mark. Yeah, so at 34 minutes, Origin and LGD are posturing on the Baron. They're trying to get us angle on the objective itself. Origin make a move towards the middle inner tower, and then Acorn teleports in front of them. And now they are sandwiched between LGD. So they're standing here in the middle of the lane in LGD territory. LGD is behind them, cutting them off from retreating to their base, and Acorn is behind them. It's going to be a great flank setup. Now, TBQ really underperforms in this game. He is a weak link in LGD. A lot of the Chinese analysts on Twitter are pointing fingers at him, just saying like, all right, so, you know, this could be a way that it's exposed him. He doesn't have his Rek'Sai. He doesn't have his Lee Sin. His Vi play was particularly just unimpressive. If you look at the scoreline here, he went 0-6-1. His team had a total of 10 kills, so that's a 10% kill participation rate as a jungler, and that's just shit, to put it in the most crass terms as possible. Maybe I think even crasser exists, actually. But he goes in for these fights. He's not targeting the right spells. He's not going for Niels. He instead goes for Mithy, locks him down. There's not this combined focus in the team fights as Imp's flying away. And in this fight at the 34-minute mark, Expeke lands his huge 3-man shockwave after, I believe, it was a Mithy is thrown in by Niels, his ultimate. He's able to score a knockup. He's able to get a stun down. This frees them long enough for Expeke to finally land a huge shockwave, which eviscerates LGD. It's almost a clean ace. It's almost a clean ace. I think a couple people survive and one person dies on Origin's side. I can't recall exactly. But it swings the game into Origin's favor. They're able to get the Baron, and then they're able to push that in and slowly collapse in these towers, and they show really good control in these sieges. And Expeke actually picks up a quadra kill, almost picks up a penta, but it gets taken away from him, but that's fine. So LGD side waves, though, were able to exert a couple pressure on the sides of the map. Like, they have these huge waves crashing into the towers, but it really is irrelevant. Origin gets enough steam with his Baron to take enough of the base of LGD, and they really begin to kind of show, like, they don't play from behind all too well. They're not getting these engages. Acorn tries again to get these desperation engages, but no one can follow up on him with these things. TBQ's not able to dive in with him because TBQ is just not playing as well as he could. Imp's unable to do that, and then it really falls apart for LGD in this case. Origin closes the game very well. They kite out the engage, and once that engage from LGD is down, they just immediately re-engage. They are able to go for these huge kills, get these resets, and then they once again go back for another Baron. The game ends with Soaz pushing in the bottom lane with a whole bunch of super minions. LGD goes for this Baron, thinking that, okay, we can kill the Baron buff, we can let Vladimir push in the bottom lane, we'll get the buff, we'll recall in 4 seconds, but Origin cuts them off as Expeke is literally just obliterating the Nexus towers, and he just split pushes the game out to an end. The rest of LGD dies at this Baron fight, and Origin come out with a massive upset over LGD that was quite a decisive game after the fight in the mid game. So Origin holding on against this LGD composition, holding on against the mechanics of these players is very impressive. We didn't really expect much out of this European team. They're not exactly the brightest Western hope like Fnatic is, but Expeke really showed up for this game in particular, and maybe he'll continue this trend. He has a history of showing up at Worlds, so perhaps this continue on. Ultimately, Origin played a really good split pushing game. They had several fumbles in the early game, but they were able to stick in there and hang on, and once they got the crucial fight down, given some misplays from LGD, they were able to close out the game in a very decisive fashion. So really well played to Origin. And who knows, maybe this could be a way to show how to beat LGD by targeting TBQ and forcing him onto junglers he's not comfortable with, and maybe this will slow LGD down, maybe be the chink in the armor that leads them to be defeated. Maybe not in the group stages. I think they'll still get out, but perhaps going on into the best of series, such as the quarterfinals or the semifinals. So that's that to consider for this game. Moving on. Our next game is H2K versus Edward Gaming. So, H2K played against SK Telecom yesterday. Ryu had a fairly good performance in the counterpick matchup. And in this game, it starts off really bumpy. Now, there's a couple things to talk about in this game, just with regards to the meta as a whole. Primarily the top lane matchup between Odomine's Fiora and Amazing J's not Dyrus, wow. I'm having the Crepo issue right now. Amazing J's Darius. So the last time we actually saw this particular matchup, it was again in the LPL regionals. And within 5 seconds of entering his lane, Amazing J at level 2 versus a level 2 Fiora was able to force the flash in a trade. We didn't get to see that though. The spectator wasn't watching that particular trade, so we don't really know why that occurred. In this game, there seems to be a little more of an interplay between the two champions. It doesn't seem to be so one-sided as that particular game was. Maybe it's just Odomine and Amazing J are more comparable players at a caliber. Maybe this is a result of Fiora getting some of the nerfs alongside Darius in the laning phase, so it kind of changes the matchup. But it's a really good game to watch how these two champions interact and the ways that you can play these two champions out. Primarily as Fiora, you want to, if Darius attempts to harass you with your Q, you just dive on in with your own Q, go past the sweet spot on his Q, so you reduce the damage you take, and then you trade aggressively with him. When he goes for the cripple, his W strike on you, you riposte that. So that's like kind of like one way to trade. If Darius apprehends you in, then you trade with him. You can take the cripple damage with the W, and then if you retreat back, as Odomine shows here, then you can riposte the Q. So it's really up to how the interaction goes in these play styles, but it's very interesting to see. Odomine has a fairly good game on Fiora. So EDG in this composition, actually, it's very greedy and it's very cocky, and it's how Monte Cristo described it, because it really lacks wave clear. We see Pawn with the Kassadin in the mid lane. You have Deft on Callista, who doesn't have like really any wave clear to speak of until she gets a Runeant's Hurricane. And then Amazing J, being on Darius, is melee range, so it's harder for him to approach the minion wave during a siege. And H2K have a really strong siege. They have the Lulu, the Gragas, and the Tristana, who can poke at you and harass you on the towers and clear the waves out really fast. So EDG needs to win this early game in order to not just get completely shit-rolled in the mid game. And that's exactly what happens here. There's a level 1 team fight, and this is the start of many level 1 team fights in the rest of this day. Oh my gosh. And let's see. We have that. And everyone burns their flash except for Lulex on his Gragas and I believe Hjarnan on his Tristana. It's a crazy level 1 fight. EG flashes to get like 1 kill in the fight. They might have walked away with 2. I can't recall exactly. But this is where we really see Lulex show how weak he is as far as the jungler goes. You're playing an environment where you're on Gragas, you have your flash up, you have a Kassadin in the mid lane who doesn't have his flash, and you don't visit him. You don't even try to gank him. Lulex really drops the ball in this early game where he really had all the ability to win this game for H2K. By all means, Kasing even tries to gank Kassadin in the mid lane, but Lulex isn't there to assist him with it, and so Pawn is able to get the freest laning phase on a Kassadin in a situation where he by no means should have a free laning phase, and he's able just to keep on face rolling Ryu. Now he forces him out of lane several times. Kassadin has a lot of damage at this point with the patch changes that have come to him, and he's just able to continually force Ryu out of his lane on a champion like Lulu, and he builds aggressively for it. So the level 1 goes into EDG's favor. They're getting through the early game. EDG then overcommits to a blue buff invade and actually gives Odomine 2 kills on his Fiora because Clearlove and Pawn go into the blue buff side. They scrap with Clearlove, they scrap with Ryu, and then it takes enough time to take enough damage. Odomine, like I just said, picks up the 2 kills. So it's a bit of an overstep from EDG in this case, and it looks like, all right, well maybe perhaps H2K can snowball this game to their advantage. And also to note on the matchup in the mid lane, Pawn is doing this, forcing Ryu out of lane without an Ignite spell. He's running teleport in this game, and we're seeing a lot of teleport mids in these games today. It's been something that's been expected from this meta. It's offering a lot of gold positions, and this is something and this teleport is going to be something which is going to punish H2K rather hard. So, Now, there is a couple questionable decisions coming out of H2K in terms of itemization, specifically Hjarnan. His first item that he builds on Tristana is an Avarice Blade. So he does this, and then he's swapped into a lane where he's going to be a lane against the Callisto. So he's not going to have any trade pressure. He's going for this scaling style, but Pawn is already getting free scaling and is working on his rod. In this situation, I think that because you're going to have this advantage on the Fiora, now I can't recall exactly if Hjarnan didn't back before O'Dominate got this kills. I don't think he did. I think he decided to do this, and then O'Dominate got this kills. But with a Tristana, when you're against this low wave clear composition, it's better to get these items and to go into a strong mid game and take these towers down before EDG can either out-scrap you and out-skirmish you and force them to play the tower game, which they are going to lose by definition of what their comp lacks. He doesn't go for that. Instead, he goes for this scaling He goes for a scaling build, trying to just accelerate the gold income that he has, and this plays into Pawn's favor because Kassadin is just going to do much more than Tristana in this game. So that fight of the blue buff I mentioned earlier takes place at 9 minutes. EDG does recover. They do pick up the first dragon at 11 minutes. And then we can constantly see like there's O'Dominate and Amazing J just duking it out. Again, it's a very fun series to watch the Fiora versus Darius matchup. But what begins to go wrong is two things for H2K. First off, Kasing and Lulex get caught out in the jungle a lot while they're trying to establish vision control for their team. First, I believe it's Lulex who gets caught out, and then it's Kasing who gets caught out. They're not supporting each other, they're not there with each other, and this gives EDG free pressure and free kills. In fact, I believe the first dragon that goes EDG is a result of Lulex getting picked off. Yep, that's exactly it. Have it written down, boys. Then this even comes to a point where literally both of them get caught off or caught out by Mako's Annie. Like, they both get caught out. Only one of them dies. But again, they are getting in these situations where they're running into more of EDG in the jungle, and they're getting picked off for it because they're they're trying to create vision control for their team, but they're doing it at the improper times. So, and again, the game goes on for a long laning phase. This is benefiting Pawn and Hjarnan, but again, it would be better if it was a shorter laning phase because Hjarnan can do more in the mid game with Tristana. And then eventually the fights start to break out. And there's these huge skirmishes. At 15 minutes, there's this huge fight in mid lane. You got the top laners teleporting in. It starts with Pawn trading on a Ryu. Then Lulex comes in trying to pick him up. Pawn gets out of the fight. Everyone else shows up there. It's a scrap, and EG wins it. And these kind of fights continue to go on. A fight in the top lane gets started off. Pawn is in the bottom lane, then he teleports to the top side. The rest of EG collapse in there, and this repeats over and over again. And H2K keep getting out-dueled, out-skirmished in these fights, and that gives EG really this game after H2K had the opportunity to just snowball with their wave clear that they had. But again, Pawn winning his mid lane matchup, Hjarnan going for this passive scaling style, and Lulex just not taking advantage of the opportunities that he was given. Just give EG this game. H2K then begin to play into their hands, just continuing to make these fights that EG knows they can win and they'll take freely, and then EG just freely closes out the game against H2K. So H2K having a lot of problems here. Lulex showing up like the weak link we expected him to be, and EG really getting away with a cocky draft. So we'll have to see if EDG makes these kind of mistakes against SK Telecom tomorrow. I don't think they will. I think they'll take it a little more seriously as far as what champions they pick. And overall, though, H2K having a very rough time in this group stage so far, going 0-2. So let's move on to our next game. Which, actually, I believe I have it. I should. There we go. It's Bangkok Titans versus SK Telecom. So this game, not really a whole lot to pull out of it. This is just a really fun game to go watch. The casting is pretty funny from Doe and Freak as the puns begin to fly on out. A lot of the jokes. They really start taking the game seriously. They say some unbelievable things such as Olaf mid. That's right. G4, the mid laner for Bangkok Titans, locks in Aurelia, blind picks it. So Faker just counter picks with an Olaf mid, and it's just immediately there's fights in the mid lane. It's really all over. It's full blown solo queue. Just crazy across the map. It's not a game that really tells us a whole lot. It's just a fun game to watch. It's a hilarious game to listen to. So if you want to just just enjoy yourself for a little bit, it's a very fun game to check out. See some mid Olaf play in action. It's just hilarious. All right, so again, very short one. Not a whole lot to talk about in that game. But the next game we do. The next game is a little more to talk about. And this is the Taiwanese team Flash Wolves versus the Q Tigers. So Q Tigers, they played against Pain Gaming yesterday, had a rough early game, but they were able to close it out with the mid-game shot calling we expect from them. Meanwhile, Flash Wolves had a very long drawn-out game with CLG. They were able to get a foothold into the mid-game, push CLG down, but CLG was able to have some miraculous play from Double Lift for him just to hard carry the team to a victory. So in this game, we expected to see Stake lose heavily to Smeb. You could argue that Smeb is one of the best top laners in the world, while Smeb is one of the worst top laners at this tournament. But Stake actually does a fairly good job of holding on in this game. And quite ironically, this game kind of plays out almost in opposite fashion of what the Q Tigers had against Pain Gaming yesterday. They have a really good early game, they get really good control over it, but then in the mid game, they really begin to slip up, and Smeb makes some very uncharacteristic mistakes in this composition. So a couple of things as far as a meta goes to draw from this game in particular is that Smeb is continually using the Gnar with the Frozen Mallet first build to kite out Darius, and this really works for Q Tiger's playstyle. This lets them go for the picks that they want, this lets them just allow Smeb to catch them out, and he's able to kite Darius forever, and it seems to be working rather well for them, at least in the early stages of the game. The second thing to note, though, is that it seems like these compositions where teams are picking Lulu and then putting her in the mid lane and then having a tank in the top lane just aren't working. There's not enough damage for these compositions, and this is an issue that occurred in the LGD versus Origin game where Imp is the only source of real damage for his team, given the fact they had a Lulu mid and then the tank Malphite top. It's just seeming not to work out for these teams, and I think that this prioritization on Lulu needs to either result in there being a damage-oriented top laner like Olaf, which is something that we'll see later on in today's games, or put the Lulu top lane, get a damage-oriented mid laner. It's got to be one of those things. I don't think that this Lulu mid tank top, with your ADC being the only source of like huge damage on the team, is going to work for you. So that's a couple of things to consider in this game. So Q Tigers start off very well in this game. We see Flash Wolves take some standard picks for themselves, like NL's Varus. So we saw Kramer yesterday. We saw NL be played today for the Flash Wolves. And also, just to amend a mistake yesterday, it was Mountain who's the jungler for AHQ and Karsa the jungler for Flash Wolves. So it's going to be Karsa today. It's just Karsa. I'm so sorry for messing that up. Gumiho, please forgive me. Karsa, there's a lot of comfort picks coming through. Karsa gets his Nidalee, NL gets his Varus, and then Q Tigers actually allow Flash Wolves to get Darius and Gangplank, and that's actually a very feasible composition to do. You put the Gangplank in mid, and you put the Darius in top lane. Now, Q Tiger's plan going into this is that they were going to pick up the Lulu for Kuro in the mid lane, and then just use her superior wave clear to Maple's Gangplank in the mid lane to take the early towers. We saw this in the LPL regionals where, I forget who played the game out, but there was a Lulu versus Gangplank mid matchup, and the Lulu was able to just solo take Gangplank's tower at 16 minutes. Kuro replicates this even more successfully by taking it at 10 minutes. Hojin, being on Lee Sin, not needing the blue buff, just keeps on giving over to Kuro so he can constantly push the lane out, get the damage on the tower, and at the 16-minute mark, he's gotten the mid-inner tower of Maple down to half health. That's just a huge amount of pressure being exerted in this matchup, and it's a really great play and show of awareness of the Tigers when it comes to pressure. Kuro's got his flanks behind him warded up so he can see Karsa come on in for him. They know Karsa's playing the top side while Hojin's playing and invading Karsa's jungle. So he's just able to freely push up. It's a really good show of macro play coming from the two Tigers in the early stages of this game. And they're showing that you can shut down this Gangplank. However, it just seems like it doesn't matter if you do that. All it takes for the Flash Wolves to come back into this game despite being chokeholded by the Q Tigers is to get one team fight where Q Tigers takes too much damage from Gangplank ult and he gets a huge chain of, and just gets one chain of barrels onto Prey and to Smeb, and then from there the Q Tigers just really fall apart. Now, to speak to some of the errors that the Q Tigers played, Smeb makes two very questionable teleports. He comes in the bottom lane early game and he just comes right in. He's got no Narbar. Just comes into 4, maybe 3 of the Flash Wolves team, and then just kill him right there on the spot. He should have canceled it. His team was out. There's no need for him to come up in there. Instead, he just shows up and gives up a kill. Okay. Then later in the game, as the Flash Wolves are getting their siege on, he teleports behind them, going for this flank, but he doesn't have his Gnar rage built up, so he's not going to become Negative Gnar anytime soon. And Flash Wolves are just able to turn on him and kill him with a couple, and then Stake is able just to aggress onto Prey. it just really kind of falls apart. Smeb having a really lackluster game. And then Gorilla, after having an amazing performance on Thresh yesterday, goes for this Alistar and he dies several times without using his ultimate. There's like 2, maybe 3 fights where his ultimate is up, he refuses to use it, and he just freely dies when he should have activated it to soak up the damage. He's just being very greedy, and it seems like the KOO Tigers, when they begin to lose the grip of a game, against a team that they, aren't really preparing for all that well. Again, they banned the Gragas here against Karsa instead of his Nidalee. Karsa's Nidalee is a really good champion for him. It's been banned several times against him in the LMS, and KOO Tigers just don't respect that. And if they start to lose in these situations, much like we saw at IEM, it seems that their mental fortitude completely shatters. Now, this isn't to excuse the KOO Tigers, but rather more this is an issue that the team is having which holds them back. And Flash Wolves are able to punish it, so that's a very good thing for the Flash Wolves. And it's an issue that the KOO Tigers still haven't sorted out despite all of this time. So, Hojin has a fairly good game on Lee Sin. Goes to crap by the end of it. Everything really just goes to crap for the KOO Tigers by the end of this game. Kuro's not hitting a couple of his ultimates. Again, Gorilla's dying without it. Smeb is not getting the flanks and executing them properly. And then the Flash Wolves are finally able to turn it on. At the start of the game, KOO Tigers have full control. They're dodging all these poke skill shots coming out of this Flash Wolves lineup. But once Flash Wolves get this team fight in the mid game where he turns around and they get the Baron buff, suddenly they force KOO to play the towers and all the skill shots start hitting. NL's arrows are starting to do damage. Karsa is wrecking people with the spears. Maple's barrels are doing anything, and KOO have no response for this. So ultimately, this really comes on KOO for messing up in the mid game. They had the early lead. They threw it away from them. It wasn't a substantial early lead. The Flash Wolves stayed fairly close with it. But ultimately, Flash Wolves did a very good job of setting themselves up for having that. And I don't think that we're going to see KOO Tigers take the same pick-ban approach away from Karsa. I think you ban the Nidalee instead of the Gragas, and I think that you don't let them have Gangplank, just because it seems like no matter how much resources you put into shutting down Gangplank, into taking his towers from him, he just needs that one team fight in the mid-game to turn it all around. So it's just not really worth letting a team have Gangplank at this point. Then our last game of the day is Counterlogic Gaming versus Pain. Let me go ahead and pull this up for you guys. And wow, it's actually a very long video. So it's CLG versus Pain. Now, Pain had a very good start of an early game against the KOO Tigers yesterday, so we wanted to see how well it would fare here. And also in the last game, there was I completely blanked on this one. There was a level 1 fight in the last game where the KOO Tigers got way ahead, so there was that. There's another huge level 1 fight in this game. Pain had a fairly solid plan. They knew CLG was going to invade their top side, so left a couple wards, tracked it, used Surti to bait them in, and then they get a really great multi-man anti-stun. However, this wasn't the comp to do that with. You're going up against a level 1 with Braum, so he can just apply his passive to everybody. There's going to be multi-man stuns, and Counterlogic Gaming walks away with 2 kills as opposed to Pain's 1 kill, and they get immediately starting out with the lane swap. So in this game, it's fairly much a stomp, and we're actually seeing the different approach here with my earlier conversation about how to use the Lulu. We see her in the mid lane again, but we're seeing her paired with Olaf, who's more focused on dealing out the damage. He's kind of like one of these pseudo-juggernauts. He wasn't part of the Juggernaut update, but he very much fits that play style of a Juggernaut. And ultimately in this game, we really see Counterlogic Gaming just win flat out early at all stages of the game. Lulu is able to push, Pole Belter on Lulu is able to push Kami's Orianna in, keep him down in items and levels, and with the advantage that's going over to Zion Spartan, Zion then just doesn't care for Kami's Orianna, and we see him just face roll him. He ignores the shockwaves with his Ragnarok and is just able to wreck the back line. Doublelift has just phenomenal mechanics in this game, dealing loads of damage for his team, and Pole Belter once again just keeping Kami shut down. So a very weaker performance coming from Pain Gaming, most likely the result of them not having such of a good level 1 fight like they did against the KOO Tigers. Now, one thing that I was worried about when Pain was coming into this game, and this comes from my research for Chaos Latin Gamers when we were preparing to face Pain in the International Wildcard qualifiers, was the inability of Pain to land engages. Dude does not engage really well. Pain as a team also does not engage really well. They keep on making these split calls where one person tries to go in and then there's not the proper follow-up on it. The only person who can really kind of take control of a game and really make these plays is Kami, but given how far behind he is and given the fact that he's playing a champion like Orianna rather than Twisted Fate, which is banned away from him by CLG, he's just no one on this team is able to make the proper fight engagements, and this really leads to CLG kind of rolling over them. So double lift Aftermoo out lane on the top side. And Xmithy, one thing to know here from CLG was beginning to see a pattern where Xmithy is just trying to repeatedly gank for Zion Spartan. He's done it twice now in these games. He's done it with different champions and different matchups. So I think that at this point it's fairly certain and fairly clear what Xmithy is trying to do for CLG. And I think that probably in their matchup on Sunday against the Ku Tigers, that Ku will be able to read Xmithy's pathing and prepare for it appropriately and get Smeb ahead of Zion Spartan. So that is one thing to consider that we've seen that is worrying and predictable out of CLG. There's a couple of fights through here, but again, CLG plays a really clean game. The only issue with this game coming from CLG is that they take forever to close it out. They have to hover on the Baron several times before there's a decisive fight around it, so they're kind of just, burning the clock on it, which is okay. They scale, but there's also giving Pain maybe the slight opportunity to come back on in here. But ultimately, doesn't really matter. And Pain makes this really bad call. CLG goes for this Baron play, and they get the Baron down to about 1600 health. At this point, Kami just needs, he puts the ball on Baron. All he has to do is Shockwave as Sir T moves into the pit, over the wall, and smites it. Dude goes for this Flash Tibbers engage, and he stuns all of CLG. Now is the time to do it. Just go. Get in there, sacrifice DU, take the Baron itself, get out of there, and then reset with your siege defense. Instead, Kami and Sir T try to loop around the Baron pit instead of going into the Baron pit, securing the buff, try to help DU out, but again, we just see him die, and this is what I'm talking about when it refers to Pain having this decisive calling when it comes to engaging. DU goes in once, by himself, no follow-up, his team doesn't follow up appropriately, in this case on the objective, and he dies, and the rest of Pain tries to go on in, but at this point, it's just too late, and CLG clean up the game really quickly after this. It's a very methodical closing from CLG. They do triple inhibitor, Pain Gaming, I believe it was that. I know Ku gets triple inhibited actually in the last game. But again, we're seeing that these patterns from CLG coming out. Xmithy is ganking for Zion Spartan all the time. Double Lift is playing these fast tower pushing ADCs like Tristana, like Jinx so far. So they have this consistent play style that maybe Ku can have a strategy for in their matchup on Sunday. Pain Gaming looked considerably worse today than they did yesterday, probably in part because they got ahead of Ku in the early game yesterday. But once more, when it comes to these mid-game scenarios, even against a team that takes as long as it did for CLG to make the decisive play, to make the pick, the setup that they needed in order to close the game out, they still aren't able to really turn around because this team does not engage as a single unit. So that's what we really picked up from today's game. So thank you guys for watching this video. I apologize for it being about 41 minutes long. Guess I had more to talk about than I anticipated. I'm going to try and get these down shorter for you guys, but there's just a lot of things to take on in, a lot of things to learn from. And tomorrow, I might just focus on the highlight matches of the day. Those being some really good games. First game of the day is going to be SK Telecom versus Edward Gaming. That's a very exciting matchup, just given the history of the two teams and MSI. So tune in for Worlds tomorrow, guys. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Just in case that you didn't get to see all the Worlds and you just want a quick breakdown, or if you're just supporting my content, I really appreciate it. You all have a great day.